Now I will create a add user. So we will add a button add user on this list. Button type button text add user. Then I will click to add user button. Then page will be redirected to the create user page. So I will create a create user page. So we will add a create component and G for generate, C for component, create user. Create user component successfully added. If click to add user, then will be redirect to the create user component. So I have add the click event on add user. If any event to be added in Angular, you can be only click on simple JavaScript. In simple JavaScript you can on click, but in Angular remove in on only click event in parenthesis. Add user method name you will be define if any page will be redirect to the another component, you will be used to route create object of router this dot router dot navigate has array argument and component name is create user. This page will be redirected to the create user. So I will click on add user, checking the errors, no errors, compiled successfully, click to add. You can check one error is console cannot match any routes create user. You can create a routes in Angular app router.module.ts file. You can click app routing module.ts file. You can create another routing for create user. Create user and component name is create component. Added successfully. You are checking. If you click add user, then will be redirected to the create user component. I am creating the design of create user component. You will be click on create user component. I have already prepared HTML design, so I will copy. That's it, copy. You have copied and styles. You have checking create form. Looks is great. So I will create Angular code. If you use this form will be Angular, you can getting the values of controller, name, email, department, gender, address, ng submit, and method name is submit. You can define template variable. Actually, I am using the template driven form. Angular have two types of forms. First is template driven form, second is reactive form. So firstly I have used template driven form. After that I will use reactive form in another component. User form. You can define a variable, template variable, ng form. ng form is a directive provided to the Angular, that is form module. No directive found with exports as ng form. You can define ng form in app routing app.module.ts file, forms module, imports forms module. You can define error has gone. This user form has a template variable. This user form have all forms filled. You can check it in next. You can pass the user form template variable and hold the submit, ng submit. ng submit is a event. Define the submit method. This submit method have user form, ng form type. ng form directive with Angular/forms. You can print console.log and checking what the values of user form. I have clicked to submit and checking ng form. ng form has a form that have validity status, touched status, values, what the values form have contains. So value have nothing in right now, so you have to define ng model every control if you are checking the values of using ng form directive. You can define suppose ng model. You have clicked submit, check the values of forms. Yeah, form name is bind up with ng form because I have defined the ng model input type controls. You have defined all others. I have defined all controls with the ng model. You have checked the values, all modules. Yes, you have checking all the values and type the values. Type you can check. You have suppose you have entered name, dv coding, dv code, @gmail. You have checked the values in form. Email is dbcoding and name is dbcoding. That means ng form have all controls value with the help of ng model directive. You can use these values on the TS page with the help of ng model. And I will try to validations on ng form. So Angular has provided the multiple classes ng test, ng dirty, like that. You have reset the values, you have reset the form again, you have checked ng untouched. That means this form not touched any click. If you click, then property will be changed, class will be changed, ng touched and ng valid. So you have implement the validation with the help of these classes. So I will try to implement validation of these classes. So you have to implement validation. So you have to define required validation with the help of HTML5. I will define. Suppose you have defined required validation. You have checked. This class have ng invalid because this name is required validation. So this class have ng invalid with ng untouched. If you provide the values, if you enter the values of name db, that ng is class will be changed ng valid, and ng untouched class will be changed. So you have defined the validations. I have defined a span. Class name is error block. Please enter name. Color will be red. This validation by default true, but this validation according to if any control will be touched, then will be validation will be showing. So you have to change conditions. Asterisk ng if is a structural directive. You have to use show and hide any section and div, any elements. So if you getting any values of this control, you will be define the template variable for this control, like as temp name equal to ng model. You will be define dot touched and temp name dot invalid. Validation message has been gone. If you click, name and not entered the name, then this validation visible. So you have to use this validation according to conditions ng invalid and also ng test property. You have to check. If you click submit, then this controls this directive have 6 module. First is ng model name, that is the value, and this value will be invalid, that is true, and valid value, that is false, and value is blank. If you click and passing the name db coding and click to submit, you have checked the values of directive ng model. Value is db coding, valid is true and invalid is false, and test is also true. So I have defined all validation in the create form. So you have defined two template variable for emails. I have implemented all validation for this control. You have checked. I have changed the message for department. Yeah, by default already selected to radio button male. You have to define gender in TS page. Gender variable equal to 0. The gender variable to be bind with the gender control. You have to use ng model two-way binding for binding the value of TS page and reflecting the value also on TS page. String will be passed. You have checked by default male selected, and also all validation will be implemented sequentially. If you select department drop-down, then will be showing the validation. Please select valid department. So if selected value, you have not validated department control, so you have to change the validation condition accordingly. Suppose you have defined template variable template department, and also you will be checked template department dot value not equal to 1. Template department dot text yes, perfect. This validation also working on drop down working is perfect. So I have implemented all the validation on create user form. Now I will be trying to push these values and add the user in database. So firstly I required department value will be binding, department dropdown will be binding from the database. So I will require another API for departments. So I will create it department API. So you have to create another controller. You have to return department list. So you have to change HTTP response message, and also you have to define context db user context response equal to new HTTP response HTTP status code is okay, and response dot content equal to new string content. You will be define the list and JSON convert for serialization. using newtonsoft.json .serialize object. You have passed the object of you have to serialize, where departments equal to context dot departments dot toList. You have to pass departments and also return the values of response. So I have to define a service for department. So I have to define another service for get department list. I have changed the base URL. Get department list method will be called in create page. Create component.ts. You have to call departments array. Get department. You have to define a service in constructor. User service. This service dot get department list dot subscribe data will be bind up, and this dot departments equal to data. Get department list. You have to check will be returning observable. Get department list will be returning observable any type. You have checked department is equal to data. This department will be bind up with select list. string4. This is the for structural directive also. Let depart of departments. You will be define the values. Depart.id, that is department ID, and depart.department name. You have to remove. You have to check the user list is not bind. What's the problem? Yes, this method is not calling ng on init. Get departments. You have to check again. Department list will be bind up from the database. Now I will trying to push these user in database. I have trying to create a code in submit button. I have defined a user variable. This dot user equal to a new variable of user. Name will be matched and property also matched in db user. So you have to define ID, email, name, mobile number, address, gender, and department ID. User form dot value dot name. You have to define all values. You have to check all values will be matched or not. Console dot log dot this dot user. I have typing db coding @gmail.com. Mobile number, department is IT, mail, address is Delhi. You have to click on submit. Address is Delhi, department ID is depart.id. I think something is wrong. I will check. Email ID is gender ID 0, that is for male. Mobile number, name. So I will check the department ID. Why is not binding with department ID and department ID? Yes. Department ID using the interpolation, because this value will be dynamic from TS page. You have to click db coding db@gmail.com. Mobile number, department, that will be the address. Click to submit. You have to check all values will be mapped with the variables. So I have to try to push in db this user. So I will create a new service for post. So I will create a post API, post user, for users API. So I will try observable, any return type, return this dot http service dot post. Post have 2 arguments and more than optional. So first is URL string, this dot base URL, concatenate users, comma. Second is body. You will be passing the user object. User is, you will be added. Post user will be called in the TS page. this .http service user service dot post user passing the value of user dot subscribe response. If response dot id greater than 0, that means user have been added successfully. Console.log user added successfully. If id is not greater than 0, that will be something wrong, so showing the error, something went wrong. You will be checking the errors. So I will try to push. So I will test. dvcoding @gmail.com, mobile number, selected department. If you pass the not selected department, that validation will be working. Department address is Delhi. You will click to submit. You have checked in console. User added successfully. You have checked also the list of users. Click to back button is not working. Why? You have to use also route link slash is the base URL, base path of matching. That will be data will be added successfully, but this data will be female. You have checked again list. Yeah, 0. If you are click to add user, that message will be successfully and pop-up will be generating on UI. So I have two components will be used. For first component used for the show the success message, and second component used for the error message. So I have created two components. Click to new terminal. And another component is for error message. Component has been created successfully. You can use these component in this page. App show error message and show success message. You will be check both message will be accordingly showing. So I have to design both components. I have copied CSS and design. I have copied CSS error and success message. You have to cross cycle for cross the message. You have to use font awesome class. In index.html page. This component showing this message like show success message. You will be dynamic. You have to pass the values, and also this message will be dynamic showing. So you have to try and see if is visible. You have to use these two variables. First is visible for hide show and second is message for dynamic. You have to define both variables. So this message will be passed from the create user component HTML. So this message will be passed from the user component, create user component dynamically. So how to pass the data from one component to two component? You have to use input variables. You have to use input directive. You have to use input directive for passing the data from the one component to another component. You have tried create component.html. You have pass property binding message and also pass the is visible variable. You have to define both variables, messy and is visible. Component.ts file. Is visible by default value is false, and message will be blank. Also use this message for is visible error. Message also same. You will be removed. Is visible error variable use and create user component.html. you have to use message. This message value will be passed to message, and message is the property binding. You have to use using the input variable and hold the values. So success message, you have to define input message, you will be define blank, and another variable input is visible for using the show hide. For using the show hide message, you have to use component is visible and message will be dynamic coming from the another components. You have to use same in error message. If user edit successfully, you have to pass this dot message user edit successfully. And this dot is visible equal to true. Same message will be passing if an error one is missing. If you cross click on click event, close message, you have to define method and this dot is visible false. This dot message blank, same as copy in error. So checking the values, try again. Value is not validation fail. You have to button will be disabled. If form is not valid, button will be disabled. User form dot invalid. Button disabled. Not clicked because address is not valid. You have to enter the address. Click to submit. User edit successfully. If you click to close, then will be message has gone back. Check the added user successfully. Thank you.